Let's move on to the integrated models. And I'm going to give you two different examples of integrated.
Okay.
But the very first one would be the discrimination model, which is integrated. It's Bernard and Goodyear's model. And here's the basic tenet. Supervisees benefit from those supervisors who work from multiple theoretical orientations. And so it's wonderful that if you are this flexible as a supervisor, you can be eclectic and choose kind of whatever you need. With the Bernard and Goodyear's discrimination model, are the supervisor's roles. You want to respond flexibly with whatever is called for. And the big thing is that you want to choose 3 processes and 3 foci. And here I'll talk to you a little bit about the roles and the focus. The process would be where you examine your communication with your clients. Mm-hmm. So when you're with Sydney in this tape, what were the certain kind of communication things that I did that was helpful and things as a counselor I did that were not helpful? Okay. Conceptualization would be, let's talk about the intention behind those skills. So explore intentions behind why you chose a particular skill. And the last one is personalization. Identify mannerisms used to interact with your clients and body language, intonation, some things like that. And I found a really good one that you did in this tape that I think will be fun to explore. So what I want to talk a little bit about probably are the conceptualization and personalization. Okay. And the first one would be, again, Brian, the intention behind, and I thought this was really interesting. You had a chance during the latter part of the tape where you said to her, Sydney, you found out that her mother was a very important part of her life. And there was a point where you said to her, what would your mother think about this? What was your intention behind that?
I think at that point in time, if I remember that correctly, my intention was really to try and help her understand that her mindset, kind of how she tends to look at things, other people are going to have maybe a different way of looking at that, and really to help her get some source of strength and support that her mom would support her. That if she was going to be honest with herself and ask that question to her mom, that she'd kind of be surprised that maybe mom would tell her something, something positive, giving her some strong feedback. She'd always said that her mother was a source of strength for her, somebody that was always tended to be in her corner. And she has a lot of times that she tends to do a lot of self-doubt, not having a lot of confidence in her own abilities or skills. And so what my real goal was really trying to get her to see that that one person who was always there for you would have agreed with what your decision was, would have been there to support you in this situation too.
So to some degree it was like giving her additional resources that she could use when she says she's confused and needs additional attention. Let's move to this personalization. This is one of my favorite parts of the tape. You were listening well, Brian, and you were thinking, I could just see the wheels turning. And every once in a while you'd whip back in your chair and you'd put one finger on your face like this. And then there was a point towards the end of the tape where you put 2 fingers on the tape and you're leaning back on your chair. Right. What was that about? What were you doing?
Well, one of the things, and actually kind of going back to the process, one of the things as far as the examining communication is Sydney was a very verbal client. She talked quite a bit. One of the things that I think I struggled with was keeping her focused, and was part of our supervision question. And she tended to get into a lot of the stories, a lot of storytelling, trying to, I think my interpretation of that was trying to give me some background information so that I could kind of have a sense of where she was coming from. And when I would tend to lean back and do that, really what that was, and as I looked at the tape, I could really tell that was me kind of settling back and starting to listen to her story. And part of that, in all honesty, was really, okay, we're getting into a story now. And in my mind, I was trying to figure out, how can I get her back to, how can I start to lead this into some process? How can I lead this back into maybe getting back more into affect, things like that? Because with those stories, she really tended to get away from the focus of either the session or maybe a particular issue that was brought up at that point in time.
I also noticed in the tape that at one point, several points, Sydney began to cry. And Brian, I want you to kind of think about this. You do this so well. You reflected several times, but at one point she started to cry and you very quickly got her out of that and asked her a question. Okay. What do you think might be behind that for you?
I think part of that probably would be my desire to kind of really start to maybe identify some issues, because I know that I was frustrated at times during this session, because I saw that there was a lot of avenues that we could go down, that we could explore, that tended to, and I guess in my mind, kind of got sidetracked a little bit with some stories. So I think part of my intention behind doing that, or unconscious intention, I guess, was really to trying to get back to exploring maybe some connections between some of these past behaviors, past patterns of thinking, things like that. And so I think that was at the expense of really being able to maybe explore some of that affect.
Because I was wondering too, and this goes back to the supervisory question, if we're back, very much what we did in developmental supervision, it's asking you to be genuine. I wondered, didn't know this, but occasionally when you were like this, I knew what you were trying to do, but I wondered if the client would think, and you were so good at, honestly, Brian, listening to her, but I sensed a little bit, you said frustration, I even sensed a little bit of, this may not be right, boredom to some degree. Like, how do I get her out of this content and move her back into process and affect? And I'm wondering if it wouldn't be wise for you to maybe just share. Sydney, I'm frustrated a little bit because, you know, you are so verbal and I love hearing you talk, but every time I get you into feeling, you kind of back away. So I see a theme here as we go through these different models even, Brian. I see the theme of asking you to be as genuine with your clients as possible. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And after reviewing the tape, I could certainly tell that as well. I think that it would have added a great deal to the session and really to our rapport. And like you had said earlier about the trust. But I was apprehensive about doing that for fear of what could happen if she didn't feel that I was interested in what she had to say. So I do believe there was certainly part of behind some of her storytelling was to try and help me understand. But I do agree that a lot of that was defocusing in a sense and getting away from maybe some of those painful feelings in that.
Good. Let's take a look then at this discrimination model. How could you see this kind of model being helpful to you as a student, as a counselor, or maybe as a supervisor, Brian?
I like the idea that it really kind of takes it, the process, the conceptualization, the personalization, really explores each one of those items, and it can really help you examine the interpersonal communication between you and your client right then on that session. And as we just talked about, in this session for me, it really kind of magnified some things that I really wasn't even aware of that I was even doing. So I think this model really can help a person look at, what kind of message are your mannerisms sending, if you're putting a finger up, what does that communicate to the client? And also being able to examine and talk about and really zero in on the intentionality, about what skill we're choosing and what is your goal with that, and how do you know, did you get there or didn't you get there with it, and what might need to be different? Well,
and I think the nice thing about that then is you're having this great therapeutic relationship with your client. But what's really nice about it is if they think, I wonder what this means, it may be something very different. And so if you can communicate that, Brian, I think that would be very helpful.
Yeah.